Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Battlefield 1 running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now this is with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and we are running on the brand new 22.7.1 drivers, which are supposed to have some performance uplifts on DirectX 11. Now with the game running at the lowest in-game graphics settings, you can see that the level of performance that we're getting here is decent, but nothing incredible. Considering that we're running at the full 1080p resolution though, the fact that our 1% lows are above 30 and our averages are in the 40 range pretty much means that we are getting a relatively playable experience, though it's nothing incredible. It's certainly a far more playable experience than you would really expect out of something like this, especially running at such a low TDP. So it's certainly impressive, but it's nothing that I would say is remarkable, but we're already off to a pretty good start considering that I already considered this to be pretty decently playable. Battlefield is a less fast-paced game than most other competitive shooters, and I would really hesitate to even call this a competitive shooter since it's really mostly a squad-based shooter. And because of the, in general, slower pace of the combat, the fluctuations in performance are just a lot less noticeable. Now, if we raise the TDP up to 25 watts, you can see here that the level of performance that we're getting here is actually not that far off from where we were at the 15 watt TDP. As the action picks up, you'll see that the 1% lows are just slightly better than the low 30s that we were at before, and it will pretty much end up dropping to around the same regions, and our averages are around the same, with really both just having a couple of FPS difference at most in the long term of playing. It's really hard to distinguish the level of performance that you're getting here from the stock setting, besides the fact that the stock setting will sometimes have a stutter, while at the higher TDP it was just less frequent, but not by a significant margin. In general, it's very comparable levels of performance as you're playing throughout the game, so it doesn't really seem like the 25 watt TDP ends up doing much to improve the overall gaming experience here, but maybe going all the way up to 30 will actually do something. And it really seems like it actually did not end up doing much of anything. We're still experiencing around the same level of FPS. Our 1% lows are all within the same range as well. You're currently seeing it just be a little bit lower, but in general it is all within the same range that you would get at pretty much all of the settings. So it really seems like TDP is not doing much of anything to improve the overall experience at 1080p. So what that leaves us with is just the option of dropping the resolution down and seeing if that will end up improving the overall experience. So we can of course drop down to 900p, and at 900p with the stock 15 watt TDP, it's actually not even that big of an uplift compared to where we were at 1080p. We're still at the same 1% low range. Our averages are pretty much within the same range as well. Overall, the gaming experience really does not feel that different from 1080p. So all we ended up doing is just dropping the resolution and just not really getting much of an uplift at all. In the long term, it felt just slightly better than playing at the full 1080p resolution at the stock TDP, but again, not by a significant margin, and you would really have to compare side by side to really start to notice any potential differences. So in general, not much of a gain here at all. And we see a very similar result with going with the 25 watt TDP in the sense that our 1% lows don't really see that much of an uplift at all. The averages are now closer to being consistently in the 50 range, but it's still not feeling like that much better of an overall experience because of the fact that the 1% lows really haven't changed much at all. And depending on how intense the action is, they'll all fluctuate within the same range anyway. So it's certainly an uplift, but it's nothing remarkable. And overall, I would say it's a decent experience, but nothing remarkable. I really wish that those 1% lows could start hitting some higher numbers, but maybe going all the way up to the 30 watt TDP will actually do something there. Now, a 30 watt TDP pretty much ended up doing very little to make the experience significantly better. Again, our 1% lows are all still within the same range, though they are now consistently above 30, and our averages are far closer to 60, but this is also a different map. And it did seem like this map overall was a little less demanding than the other one. And really, it would just end up depending a lot on the specific map that you're on for what exact performance you were going to get. But overall, the experience of playing like this did not feel that significantly better than any of the other settings. It certainly was hitting slightly higher numbers, but overall, nothing felt too remarkable. And the temperatures that I was reaching were pretty much starting to get to the point where it made using the laptop very uncomfortable. Like my hands were starting to feel the burn. So all in all, not really a setting that I would end up using on my particular system, but maybe you're on one that can actually handle these temperatures. But that really only left the option of dropping the resolution down to 720p to see if that would actually give us a boost. And at the stock 15 watt TDP, it's certainly the most playable that we've seen it because it's very close to a 60 FPS average, but our 1% lows are still relatively low. Depending on the particular map that you're on, those 1% lows could be anywhere from the high 20s to low 30s. So in general, it's all staying within the same range, even from like the full 1080p resolution going all the way down to 720p. It's almost like an odd situation where we're just limited by, I'm guessing, the CPU at this point, because it really doesn't seem like we're getting any boost at all from dropping the resolution. Like, we are getting at least some gains because we are now getting an average that is at 60, but it's those 1% lows that just have not seen any major improvement at all. But of course, we are running at the stock 15 watt TDP, so maybe raising the TDP will actually open up a bit more performance here. And that does not appear to be the case. We are, of course, seeing a uplift in our averages, but it's those 1% lows that kind of drag down the whole experience, because it really means that overall the experience is going to be relatively similar, because that boost in averages is not going to be felt if you're going to be fluctuating all the way from 63 down to high 20s. So you'll see that the numbers are really just all over the place and they're not going to be consistent. It's going to be just an overall rough experience, and it just seems to be present at all settings here. I certainly wouldn't call this unplayable, but it's definitely an odd result. You can definitely get away with playing the game like this, and if you don't have an FPS counter, you're probably not going to care too much about what's going on. You're pretty much going to be able to enjoy the game, but honestly, dropping the resolution didn't really seem to do much. There are some improvements to be seen, of course, but in general, it's nothing substantial. And so if you just want to keep the full 1080p resolution, or maybe just stick to 900p, I would go with that instead of dropping all the way down to 720p, because it doesn't really seem to give you too much of an uplift in a lot of areas where it would matter. In big open areas, you might see the FPS hit some higher numbers here and there, but when you're actually in a fight, it can just end up dropping down to the exact same numbers that everything else was at. So there seems to be some improvements, but in the moments where it seems to matter the most, it really falls apart to the same levels where everything else was at. But you will see moments where the FPS counter will actually show 1% lows and stuff like that that are up in the 40 range. But like I said, when there's big moments of action, it will just end up dropping down to the same levels that we've seen before. So certainly an inconsistent experience overall. And lastly, we could just look at the 30 watt TDP at 720p, and you'll see that again, we're getting pretty much identical numbers as before. Our 1% lows are going to be just all over the place, sometimes dropping into the 20 range, other times going up into the 30s. It really just depends on what is going on in the game. And at this point, it's become pretty apparent that there is some limitation going on here that will not allow the game to go anywhere past this level of performance. It's still doable, and it is the best experience that we've seen so far, but that's just in terms of 720p in general. There doesn't really seem to be that much of an uplift with changing the TDP. So I would say that overall the game is doable on here, but you really aren't going to be getting any higher of an experience from setting a lower resolution. So maybe stick to 1080p or just go down to 900p and leave it there and just enjoy the FPS that you get. Don't really think about putting on a counter. But anyways, I will see you guys in the next one.